Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. It's Science Fiction Saturday again. So I've got two science fiction movies that I'm going to compare and contrast, even though they have absolutely nothing in common. First one is 1963's Toho epic Matango, otherwise known in English language circles as The Attack of the Mushroom People. And then a 2024 movie, which is in the Sony Spiderman Universe, and it is Kraven the Hunter, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson and Rusty Crowe. So I'm comparing and contrasting these for no particular reason, apart from the fact that I can probably try to do a tier list on which one's the better movie. It's going to be fairly easy to do, but we should get started with it. Let's look at Matango. Matango is a wild film and is very much darker than many of the Tokusatsu movies that Toho did in the 1960s. It was directed by the GOAT of Tokusatsu, Honda Ishiro. It's actually based on a 1907 short story by William Hope Hodgson called The Voice in the Night. And the bones of the original story are still there, though Honda did expand on them in a big way to make a movie. The rule of thumb is that if you want to do a movie based on fiction, you're better off to make a movie based on a short story. If you want to do a novel, you're probably better off doing some kind of short run series. But Matango, which shares its name with a town in Africa, come to think of it, is pretty bloody wild. And it has a lot of the things that I really enjoy in Toho's movies, particularly during the Showa era. Probably the thing I like most that's in these things are nightclub scenes. I love Japanese 1960s nightclubs. And we have 2 or 3 scenes set in nightclubs in Matango, even though most of it's set either on a luxury yacht that's just been built by a rich guy or on this island where it rains 90% of the time. So there's a frame story around Matango where a guy who is a psychology professor has returned from the island where the Matango is and is basically imprisoned in a psychiatric hospital in Tokyo. And pretty much all you get at the psychiatric hospital is the window, the little room in which the guy's in, and a whole bunch of neon lights and a fake city backdrop beyond that. And I like that. I think that works really well. It gives the movie a slightly spooky environment even before we get to the story the frame is wrapped around. So we've got a whole bunch of people on a yacht traveling across the Pacific Ocean. There's an innocent kind of girl. There's a nightclub singer who has a reputation for being a bit of a men's lady, let's say, though they don't go into specifics on whether she's a sex worker or not, or just a bit of a tart. The wealthy man who had the yacht built is played by an actor that really did look familiar to me until I realized where I'd seen him before. He's an actor called Soshia Yoshi, who was the human vapor in the movie The Human Vapor back in 1959. He's in that, and there are a whole bunch of other people, I know that guy's face from somewhere. And when you see that in a 1960s Toho movie, 90% of the time, the place you saw this guy's face was either Sanjuro, The Seventh Samurai, or some other Kurosawa samurai movie. Lots of familiar faces in these movies, and I'm there for that. I really like that. And there are about 3 or 4 actors in this whose faces are really familiar from previous movies that you've seen. And Soshia Yoshi was a favorite actor of Kurosawa's. He turned up in all of these films as well. People interviewed him about making this movie and making the kind of low budget, their Class A movies that Toho made, the Tokusatsu movies. He had a really great take on it. Basically, he said, whether I'm working for Kurosawa Akira or whether I'm working for Honda, it's a gig. I'm an actor. I do these things. And I will treat each of them with as much respect as the other. And you've got to love that in an actor. You like people who do the job well and people who have a perspective on doing their job well. Just remember me saying this when I go on to talk about Kraven the Hunter, because I've got a few things to say about it in that context as well. So they're on this boat, which is a fairly small yacht for a rich guy, but we'll let that go. They only have a certain amount of money to put into the film. And it hits a storm, and the guy who owns the boat tells them not to go around and to keep muscling through the storm, and they do. The boat gets wrecked, it's left adrift, fog drops in, and they come to a mysterious island. because who doesn't love a mysterious island? So they wash up on the shores of the island. The boat's pretty much knackered. They don't have a lot of food left. They're running out of water, all those things. And so they go ashore. The island has black sand on it. It's volcanic, so it's got black sand. Black sand islands freak me out because I grew up on the east coast of Australia, where you also have pale brown sand or white sand. They're the two choices we got. And then when I went over to New Zealand, I went to the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand and saw black sand. It kind of freaked me out. I thought there'd been an oil slick, but no. There are places in the world that have black sand. There are even beaches that don't have sand at all. Hi to the people in England. But that kind of adds to the atmosphere of this, the fact that they use black sand beaches. And a lot of the location shots were actually not shot around Tokyo. They were shot on an island about 300 kilometers south of Tokyo, a place called Hachijojima, which is a somewhat isolated island. It's about 50 kilometers from anything else. And one of the things about the actual island where they filmed this movie is that it's known for, amongst other things, having a large amount of bioluminescent mushrooms growing there. So obviously when the location scouts were looking for where to make Attack of the Mushrooms people, this island came to mind because it was very famous for the bioluminescent mushrooms. And it looks good too. It's got lots of rocky cliffs. It's got a somewhat semi-tropical environment being further south than Tokyo. And it looks good. You know, it's rocky, it's mountainous, very verdant. Perfect place for this kind of thing, even though a lot of the shots as we get further into the movie. And this movie really hits its stride about half an hour before the end. Were shot on a soundstage. They get to the island, they're wandering around, they try to find food. They find a wrecked ship which has been washed up on the shore and isn't going anywhere because it's been washed up far enough to be anchored on the shoreline. And they go below decks and it's covered in mold. They're looking for food, they're looking for an explanation on why the ship is there. And they find enormous big jugs of carbolic acid. They wipe down the whole ship to get rid of the mold. They find some supplies of tinned food which will eke out their existence for a while longer. And they find the diary of the captain. What they don't find is any human beings alive or dead. Now, as they are on the island for longer, and it still has a ranger, it's still just foggy and fairly dry weather, the tensions start to build. They've got two attractive women on the ship. They've got a whole bunch of different men. And the frustrations of being shipwrecked starts building those tensions among the crew members, the guests aboard the ship, and, of course, the two women involved. So the characters get darker and darker and more strident and more dangerous the further we get into this movie. There are a couple of things where there's somebody up on deck when there's none of their people up on deck, and they see some footsteps going away on the sand at nighttime, and somebody's glimpsed something out of a porthole, that kind of stuff. So Honda builds the tension wonderfully, and having the characters not on the landscape, but in the tight confines of ship cabins, really builds this tension well. Eventually it starts raining and it just doesn't stop for weeks. And that then sets off the mushroom spores for the Matango mushrooms. And that's where things start going in a very science fictional and very dangerous and very weird and wild way. Because once you've eaten a Matango mushroom, you can't stop. It's like eating Pringles or peanuts. So they're addictive, but kind of like the stuff in Larry Cohen's movie. You eat the mushroom, then the mushroom starts eating you. And you start getting extreme fungal infections which turn you into a mushroom person eventually. And that, of course, is where the horror lies. And Honda doesn't make it humorous at all. He plays everything from start to finish dead straight. No humor, no tongue-in-cheek, no self-awareness and self-referential stuff in this. It's played dead straight all along the line. And it is very much a dark and kind of tragic story in a sense, because nobody asked to be turned into a mushroom person. The movie was quite controversial at the time as well, because a lot of the makeup effects for the people with the mushroom infections on their face of that resembled the scarring that people who survived the atomic blast in Hiroshima and Nagasaki had. And so that was very controversial socially. And the movie was almost not shown in Japan because of that. And probably for a Japanese audience in the 1960s. You got to remember this movie came out only 18 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It would have enhanced the horror of these people being disfigured. The movie was successful, but there was that kind of visceral thing going on in Japan about it. I mean, I liked it. I think that the model effects during the storms of the boat being knocked around by the waves and the tempests work really well, and model work was something that Toho Studios did extremely well. The locations are great, the sets are good. There's a whole bunch of scenes in the valleys of the mushrooms where the mushrooms are being pounded by the rain, and they're just tumescing and growing visibly on the beds of moss they're lying on. And that in itself is kind of creepy. We're not used to seeing mushrooms move in the same way we're not used to seeing plants move, as they did in Day of the Triffids, which was made in about the same time as Matango, come to think of it. That kind of stuff works. Honda does a few scenes where these mushrooms are just growing and expanding, and basically they are tumescing. There's no people in those scenes, but it's just happening in the background, and you think, oh shit, this is going to happen. And that works really well. The acting's all on point. The intensity of the acting is really on point. There's a lot more sexual tension than you normally got in a Toho Tokusatsu movie as well. There's some really yucky, toxic, masculine behavior that happens in this movie as well. Not to the point of it getting to a criminal act, but there's some very, very icky scenes of men not being the best selves in isolation in the company of women. But Matango works. It's a horror movie. It's a science fiction movie in a sense. And it's done with a level of honesty. It wouldn't be made in the same way if it was made in America. Now, the American version of Attack of the Mushroom People, I wouldn't watch that one, apart from the dubbing, which is always atrocious. It's about a minute shorter, which means some of the more visceral scenes and visceral moments in the film have obviously been cut out. And I always like seeing Toho movies in particular with subtitles and the original soundtrack, because I want the full performance of the actors. I just don't want to see them and then watch another actor reading the lines. The actors and actresses in this movie really hit their mark well, and that vocal intensity matches the physical intensity the way it never does when you're watching a movie that's been dubbed. I recommend from me. What would I do in a double feature if I was going to do this? You could probably chuck Mothra and Matango together. I think that'd be a good one, because they've got nightclub scenes in them apart from anything else. So that'd be a nice match together. But enjoyed it a lot, had a great time with it, and it kind of made me want to have a mushroom stir fry for dinner tonight and see what happens. So that was the first one. Then this morning, my local cinemas reopened. The one's only a kilometre from my place, so I can walk there. The Village Cinema Complex at Werribee Plaza. And so I thought I'd go down there and check it out. They've redone all the concession stand area, and it's all done very nicely and with tech upgrades, so you can scan a QR code and just tap with your phone and get all of your drinks and your snacks, which are, as always with cinemas, overpriced. So I went there to see Kraven the Hunter, and I showed them my card and I signed a little bit of paper that I've got to sign so I can go in and see it as a review thing and not pay for the ticket. Walked down, and the cinemas didn't look any different. The corridor down to the cinemas didn't look any different. And when I got in the cinemas, all the seats were the same. Everything had a renovation. The seats had been reupholstered, and the carpeting had been redone, and the curtains on the walls and the curtains at the front had all been redone. But they hadn't upgraded anything. There wasn't reclining seats. There wasn't any of the cool stuff that I get at other cinemas. But I'm kind of okay with that. It is a multiplex in a shopping centre, so they're not going to go out of their way to make it any better than it needs to be. If you want that experience, you can pay a premium and go into the gold class cinemas. And I think particularly with Village, they won't put reclining seats in your standard cinemas, because then people wouldn't go to the gold class cinemas with the posh reclining seats and the table service at your seat and all the other things you get as a premium bonus in that level of cinema. And I watched the movie. Now, this is, I think, the third movie in the Sony Spiderman Cinematic Universe, which is all of the Spider-Man adjacent villains that Sony has the intellectual rights to, having bought it off Marvel about 30 years ago, and they still retain the rights to them. And there was this plan to do standalone movies for a number of Spider-Man villains and then bring them all back into a Spider-Man movie, so that we know who the villains are because we've seen all their previous movies, and they can all go up against Spider-Man. You end up with a kind of Avengers Endgame light happening there. Not the best plan, because we had Morbius, which was pretty bloody bad. We had Madam Web, which was pretty bloody bad. And then we got Kraven the Hunter, which is kind of okay, but not brilliant. Of the three, I think Kraven the Hunter is the best, with one proviso I'm going to tell you about anyway. We have Aaron Taylor Johnson, who in some stage in the future may turn out to be James Bond. Who knows? It's a mystery. Playing the son of a Russian drug lord, who is played by Rusty Crowe. Russell Crowe plays the Russian drug lord, using that really strange Russian accent that he shares with Ray Winston whenever they have to play Russians. And we see at first him with his two teenage sons. He gets them out of the posh school they're in America and takes them to Africa to hunt animals because, he wants them to be men and he wants them to be hunters and he wants them to be brave and tough and to kill little furry beasts. So Rusty the crime lord, whose name is Nikolai Kravenov, takes his two sons, Sergei and Dmitri, off to a safari to shoot things. They shoot some kind of antelope. I don't know much about African antelopes. One of the ones is at Werribee Zoo anyway. And he starts doing the mystical thing of, you're a hunter, you can feel the life ebbing out of this thing I just shot, all that kind of stuff. And then Sergei is attacked by a lion which has got mystical properties. It's supposed to be hundreds of years old, when we all know, of course, that lionesses do most of the hunting in lion prides, and the males just kind of scavenge the food, screw the females, and lay out in the sun. Nice work if you can get it. But anyway, they've got this CGI lion who grabs Sergei by his backpack and drags him off into the bush. They follow him, they put a few bullets in him, but he gets away. And Sergei is laying underneath this lion that's about to kill him. Meanwhile, a young woman called Calypso, whose grandmother is some kind of magic lady, wanders off in the bush with a magical elixir her grandmother has given her after doing a tarot reading for her. And she comes upon Sergei and the lion. The lion backs off, and Calypso gives Sergei a healing potion that her grandmother has given her so that Sergei doesn't die. What she doesn't know is that some of the lion's blood has dripped into the wounds Sergei has, and the potion will heal people, but will heal them in a strange way and will change them, according to Calypso's grandmother. Sergei's airlifted to the hospital. He dies on the operating table for 3 minutes, comes back to life, and grows up to be Aaron Taylor Johnson and to have extraordinary powers. He's agile. He's like a parkour guy crossed with Spider-Man, because obviously at some stage in the future they were thinking of having him fight Spider-Man. So he's got to be really strong. He's got to be able to survive falls from a high building. He's got to be agile as hell, and he's got to have some kind of superpowers. In this case, Sergei, who adopts the name Kraven the Hunter, has an affinity with wild animals, some kind of telescopic vision, and a little bit like the Spidey sense kind of thing. When danger's around, he can zoom his vision in and see what the threat is. And he becomes a world-famous assassin, having nicked off from his father, who's toxic as hell. His other brother, Dmitri, ends up being a nightclub pianist in London. And his father's given him his own nightclub. He's very good at vocal mimicry. He can mimic anybody, so he's there at his piano mimicking more famous singers, for instance. Nikolai's still running his drug stuff. Sergei/Kraven is traveling around the world assassinating bad guys for money, because nice work if you can get it. We see a prolonged scene where he goes and gets himself imprisoned in a Russian prison so he can kill the Russian crime bosses in the prison. And there are some really cool action scenes there. The action scenes in this movie are pretty crisp. Some of them are, of course, CGI enhanced. But I think with a couple of exceptions, particularly the big boss battle at the end, the action scenes are quite well done, quite well paced, even though they're not things that we haven't seen before. The car chase with somebody clinging to the top of it who's got minor superpowers and is trying to get into an armored SUV, that kind of stuff. Or jumping up the side of buildings and just climbing from level to level, grabbing hold of the window frames and things like that. All this stuff we've seen before, but it's done professionally and done without cringe in this movie. Meanwhile, there's another guy, played by Alessandro Nivola, who is an up-and-coming crime guy. He has a backpack which constantly feeds medicine into a stoma he has on his side because he has various diseases, and he has received a cure which has made things worse for him. If he doesn't have this constant drip feed of drugs into him, his skin gets really tough and leathery, and he's in a lot of pain. This, of course, ends up with him becoming a well-known Spider-Man villain, played in the previous Spider-Man movie, much more amusingly, by Paul Giamatti. That's as far as I'm going in spoilers on that. We also have another assassin called the Foreigner, who works for Alessandro Nivola's character, and who has some really interesting powers, which make him, even though he isn't as strong or as agile as, or as animal savvy as Kraven the Hunter, make him a very much a genuine threat to Kraven the Hunter. And we have some really good scenes of those two fighting as well. I think the movie is slightly overlong. There's a lot to cram into it. You got the origin story, you got the family stuff with Russell Crowe and the brother. Now, as far as the acting is concerned, Aaron Taylor Johnson does a good job as Kraven. He's got to be surly and kind of somewhat sexy, I suppose. He looks really cut. He's really bulked up and got incredibly fit to the job. We have Ariana DeBose playing Calypso, and she's okay, though the script doesn't give her a lot of agency and doesn't give the character a lot of depth. Fred Heckinger playing Dimitri the brother is fine, I suppose. The Foreigner is played by an actor called Christopher Abbott, and he has a little bit of riz. He's quite a scary character in his own way. And Russell Crowe is basically phoning it in. He's doing no more than he has to. He's leaning into the cliches of the Russian crime boss genre. He could almost be the father of the person who kills John Wick's dog, that kind of level of character. And Alessandro Nivola playing Sistovic, the guy who with the stoma and the drugs and all that kind of thing. For a major villain in a superhero movie, doesn't deliver. He is just understated and just no better than a kind of TV series level villain, which really doesn't work. And when he does let loose and become the villain we know from previous Spider-Man movies in a different iteration, it becomes a CGI fest. His character is CGI to the max because there's no human being that looks like that, of course. And there's a big battle in Siberia, not cold Siberia, but summertime Siberia, which includes a whole bunch of large buffalo, a whole bunch of large military trucks, Kraven the Hunter, and this guy. And it doesn't work. The CG is competent, but it lacks a little bit of that sense of mass and weight. When things get thrown around, you don't get that visceral feeling that they're real objects that have mass to them. And that boss battle isn't as exciting as some of the earlier action scenes. The one in London where he's chasing the SUV, for instance. Nowhere near as exciting as that. Nowhere near as exciting as the bit where the kid gets grabbed by the lion, for instance. It's kind of like the end of The Incredible Hulk, where you have two CGI objects in a computer fighting each other. It's got that level of meh about it, which is kind of a disappointment. Now, there's a lot of backstory to a lot of characters. There's a little bit of foreshadowing for future sequels at the end of the movie. And to be honest with you, with the box office this movie has, those sequels are guaranteed not to happen. But it's kind of entertaining while you're watching it. You know, see it when it first comes out on streaming service level entertaining. It's not go and see it at the cinema. You're going to love it entertaining. The cinema was fairly empty when I went and saw it. There were like 6 or 8 people. And I found out the really interesting thing you can do in the cinema when somebody behind you starts talking is you turn around and their girlfriend will tell them off for talking during the movie. So I'm keeping that one up my sleeve when I need it, because I've been finding when I go to the cinema lately, not always, but sometimes, you have people looking at their phones in front of you and the light shines up in your face. Or you get somebody sitting behind you talking to their girlfriend like they're sitting at home watching something on a streaming service. It'd be nice if people understood the rules. And there is the little crawl that comes up at the start of the movie telling people to turn off their phones. That should be added and going, and shut the fuck up while you're watching the movie as well. There are other people around. But we don't get that kind of public service announcement because they don't often say fucking them. But anyway, I can say this towards the end of the video once or twice. But anyway, let's talk about the two movies together. Which one's better? It's clearly Matango. Matango's got the sense of uniqueness about it. Carnivorous fungi on an island and characters that are just getting crazier and crazier as they're isolated there. really works as a movie. And of course, it is Honda to Ishiro, and it is Toho, and it does have all of those virtues and all of that studio stuff that Toho had at the time. And it does maintain its bleak tone all the way through the movie with great success. Whereas Kraven the Hunter is a movie that was made to lead up to another movie. It was meant to be all of these villains get lined up and go up against Spider-Man. We get Tom Holland back, we get him to do his thing, and we have the villains go up against him, Madam Web and Morbius and Kraven the Hunter. It seems like an ill-conceived plan. It's following a template that was good a decade ago. And I think that's the flaw in it. The superhero intellectual properties need to do something new, which is why it's interesting watching the new series of Creature Commandos that James Gunn's doing as an animated thing, almost as a prelude to him changing the DCEU. And Creature Commandos does things differently. It's much more for grown-ups. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil them. But it's a solid superhero thing for an adult audience. It doesn't have to cater to the kiddies. It doesn't have to cater to toy merch. And it does really well. Fantastic voice actors, good plots, good scripts. It's grown up, and I appreciate that. Whereas Kraven the Hunter feels like a step backwards in the superhero genre of film. So that's what I got for you this time. Japanese movie that kicks ass every way you can look at it. And a modern franchise film, which is okay to watch, but I'm going to forget it in 2 weeks, and I'm going to find something else to watch. I mean, the attention horizon on Kraven the Hunter is incredibly low. So, but, you know, if you're interested in the Sony Spider-Man movies, you're going to go see it, or you're going to watch it when it comes to streaming, or you're going to buy the DVD, or you're going to buy the Blu-ray when there's 20% off at JB Hi-Fi, all of that kind of stuff. But Matango is definitely the better film. Kraven the Hunter is not a bad film, but it's not a great film. And I think that mediocrity is a disappointment. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let me know if you've seen Matango and whether you've seen Kraven the Hunter or whether you're interested in seeing Kraven the Hunter. To be honest with you, I'll probably get it on Blu-ray when it comes out because I've got the other two and I've got the Spider-Man movie. So I'm trying to keep the gang together. I'm not going to be getting it as soon as it comes out on Blu-ray. I'm going to wait a little while. By the way, you can support the channel by either becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/cherrytalksmovies for as little as $1 American per month. Next up, I've got some new stuff from Imprint Films, which is very good. And for Wednesday's video, Middle-Aged Geek Girl and I are doing a gift exchange. We got $50, we spent it at Temu, and we gave each other's gifts. And this video is going to be her giving me the gifts she got for me. Then we go back to Science Fiction Saturday again. And I'm also doing a 24-hour movie marathon split into 2 12-hour sessions. I've got some cool films and a couple of very bad things that I'm putting into a random number generator. And I'll pick out the movies and just watch them and tell you what I think of them. All that's going to happen again before the end of the year. And then New Year's Eve, 11 p.m, going to do my live stream to keep everybody happy as 2024 turns into 2025 here in Melbourne. So until all that stuff happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch an old Toho Tokusatsu movie and have a really good time. And I'll catch you next time.